Hello everyone and welcome to the first no-code interview we're doing here in 2022. We're going to be taking it on a little bit of a different path this time. Still talking to the founders of no-code tools, but this time we're going to get a little bit more serious about no-code. We're going to be looking at the various no-code tools that are really useful for work, and also how people can implement them there, and the kind of things that they're working on and creating. Now I'm here with Mark Piller, who is the CEO and founder of a very serious no-code tool called Backendless. I'm sure Mark will talk about that in just a second. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, talk about what Backendless is doing, and hopefully you come away with a bit of an itching to try it. But Mark, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Niall.
No problem. So before we go ahead and get into what Backendless is, I want to start out with a little bit of a, let's call it an icebreaker question. What are maybe one or two words that you might use to describe the no-code scene over the last kind of year or so?
I would say that lately it's been innovative, because we're seeing a lot of new ways that people come up with to make application development easier. So innovation is definitely one of the attributes that I would associate the no-code movement with. Another one is open, because pretty much every single vendor that you talk to or you hear about no-code from, they talk about the openness and democratization of software development, and I believe it is a theme and one of the attractive points of no-code, where it really brings the barrier down into the whole realm of software development.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And especially on the innovation point, I think other than maybe Web3 and the whole kind of crypto space in the last couple of years, I don't think I've seen any space move as quickly as no-code has. And I think that openness is a really, really big part of it. People are just really willing to not just kind of get involved, but also just to help each other. And I do see quite a lot of, even between, the tools and, like Backendless or like whoever else, people are pretty collaborative, they're not as kind of territorial as they are when I've worked in other, competing kind of software spaces. Everyone kind of just wants to grow the pie, But yeah, obviously, kind of speaking of innovation, as I mentioned, you are the CEO of Backendless, in case you didn't know. And for some people watching, they might know what that tool is, but it'd be great to hear a little bit about, in your words, what Backendless is and how it came about as well.
Sure. So Backendless is an end-to-end application development platform. It is a complete system that you can build mobile, web applications, or just systems without any front end. It can become completely 100% backend systems that participate in any kind of integration workflows. But for the majority of the use cases that we see, it is a system that people use to build front end, and it integrates nicely with the backend, and with as far as the backend, it provides a complete set of the backend functionality where anything that you need to do to happen on the server, you will find that Backendless has something to offer. The whole idea about the company and Backendless as a platform really came down to the point where we said that, yes, everybody's doing application development, but what I think a lot of people are missing is that the whole scalability aspect. Because, and it's something that I believe deeply, is that whenever you start using a product that helps you to build software, many times you build something and you invest a lot of emotional energy and time, and you build something and it's ready, and then users start coming to your application, and then things start slowing down or just crash and whatnot. And then what would happen? Well, you haven't really thought about scalability. And then with Backendless, the whole vision that the company was started with is that scalability needs to be part of the service. It's not something that you have to think about or hire expensive engineers or architects or buy very large servers. It needs to be built in, just like any feature that you expect that you call an API and data set and database. You should expect that no matter how many users come to your platform, it's going to be fast. You launch in beta, you have 1, 10, 100 users. Great, it's fast. When you have million users, nothing should change. The platform should really provide the same kind of responsiveness. And that's what we built the whole company around that idea. And of course, there is a lot in there, the complete UI that you can do anything and literally anything. And you can inject custom code. It's all no code based, but you can inject your own JavaScript. You can bring in NPM modules. You can customize the entire UI with CSS and less. So just give it a completely unique look and feel. You can run it on mobile. We actually have, and we'll talk about it if you'd like, the whole, native stories, how you push it to the app stores. As far as the backend, full-blown database that is just like nuclear power that is given to you, where you can just have all kinds of data types. You're not restricted to 50,000 records as some other solutions. You can load it up with millions of records and it will be just as fast. So I know it's a long answer. The short answer, it's a complete visual application development platform.
Yeah, it's a serious tool for serious people. You need a long answer for how much it can do, and I really feel you about it should kind of work at any scale. I used to work at a kind of large enterprise years and years ago, and we were trying to get a website hosted there, and so you had to go to the IT department and order servers, and they asked you this question, which was like, how many users are you going to have? And there was, little boxes you could tick for like 200 or 1,000 or something. And it's just such an insane way to think about things because, all right, I've got maybe 1,000 users, but then what happens when I get on the front page of the New York Times, with my highly successful business here? Immediately that just becomes, it's just useless. So yeah, I think, and especially now in this kind of viral age, you really need to have that built in. And you guys have got, because people kind of they'll talk about this whole idea like, can no code scale? And most people think the answer is no. But am I right in saying you guys have got an app running on Backendless called, I think it's YT count or YouTube count. It's got over, is it right, 60,000 monthly active users?
It's just one of them. There are multiple apps where the number of users is actually in the millions. There are apps where we have, we look at the data tables and there are millions of records. So the scale that people reach with Backendless and the apps that we see people building is really enormous. And it covers different types of installations that we have one centralized installation that we call Backendless Cloud. There are tens of thousands of developers with thousands of apps on it. And then there are installations that are dedicated installations that we build specifically for a customer. That's for some of the clients where the traffic literally is in the tens of thousands of API calls per minute, 24/7. So the scale that people can reach doesn't really have its limits. Okay, the limits are not going to be in the software that we build. It's going to be limited by the hardware. But since we actually have our own data center that we can just scale out and just add additional hardware and then continue scaling it out, and the architecture of the system is done in a way where we could have multiple cabinets with multiple servers, and it will continue working smoothly. So as far as the association of scale with no code, I have a theory why it happens. Okay, I'm not going to be calling any names, but I think everyone will know what I'm talking about. So there is a company that is just kind of pioneered and is associated with the concept of no code in the UI development. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, and I don't know exactly what they are, but I can suspect what they are. The whole system, once it's built and it's put under pressure, doesn't really work that well because I think their backend kind of inferior, right? But the UI, yeah, people can do a lot of stuff with the UI. So a lot of people have good experience building the UIs and kind of getting to the point quickly, and it's all like MVP based. And then once they launch those applications with that platform, they do not really scale that well. As a result, there is a link in people's mind. Okay, I use no code. I launched the app. It doesn't scale, and they connect the lack of scalability with no code right there. Okay, and it's very sad for the reason that there is really no direct association with no code and scalability. Okay. In fact, with Backendless, our no code approach, and we developed a system called Codeless, which is visual programming. You do not need to know a programming language, and that's what everybody in the no code space says. But you have to think algorithmically. You gotta, our approach is different, where you do not fill out a form that's, just describing. You actually model your logic visually. There is a block for, loops, for assignments, for collections, for variables, for individual elements that comprise your logic. They are represented with visual blocks. You connect them to kind of build your logic. And technically, it is not very different than writing code, because it's just the way how you express logic. With code, you express it with a language. And in our case, you express it graphically. The scalability aspect comes from several things. One is, how the platform is built that the whole code runs on top of. Second, how you design your schema, how you define your queries, how you define, the assigned responsibilities. So all those things are very important. But the fact that you are doing it with no code, in our case, has absolutely no connection of whether your app will scale or not, because it merely just a layer to express logic. Scalability and logic are orthogonal, I believe. Scalability directly is related to as I said, the platform itself, and second, the decisions you make in your data architecture, not so much in how you express it. Of course, you can build an infinite loop, and that your app gets into that kind of state, and the whole page just hangs. Is it a scalability problem? No, it's a problem with your logic, and no one is secured from kind of getting into this place. You could easily do it with code or without any code.
Yeah, I agree with that. I hear people say that a lot, and it's usually the first thing I say to them is like, well, when you say scale, what do you mean? Is it the number of users, which is usually what people mean? Is it the number of API calls? And what I often tell people is you can have an application where 10 users end up making 1 million API calls because of the way it's set. And equally, you can have 1 million users making one API call each or something like that, and still ultimately get to the same scaling issue. I think in the no-code space, we just don't, and I guess it's a name, right, no-code, but we just don't have the tools mentally, as a user base to figure this kind of thing out. We're still, I think, in the infancy of, as a collective learning how these tools work, and sort of, if you don't have that formal kind of programming knowledge, how do you start to learn the, you mentioned like things like loops there. How do you start to learn what a loop is? How do you know if you've created an infinite loop that's going to kill your server? I think we're just in this stage at the moment where people don't quite know how that all works and how that fits together. How do you guys, like, I don't know if you so much educate them, but how do people find that running into your platform?
You hit the nail in its head. So yes, so as far as the scalability, I think it really is number of users and the amount of data, because the amount of the API calls in most cases would correlate to the number of users. Like if in any given workflow of a user going through your application, you generate X number of calls. When your user base grows by a certain magnitude, then that X is multiplied by that magnitude, right? But it really will be the number of users and how much data is you're dealing with, because you could have very few users, but you're executing database queries against the table with millions of records, and then it may have related data and so on. So those queries may not be optimized. But as far as the question of how we would deal with users who are prone to make mistakes, and when it comes to the no-code community, given that the bar has been lowered a lot, and you do not need to know a programming language, and it's much easier to learn a visual form where you can fill out, or like if you take a look at things like apps like Zapier or systems like Zapier, as long as you can understand conceptually, the kind of events or actions that may come from Google Sheets or, Google Analytics or any give take any system, it will be fairly straightforward to wire things together. And it's a great story for no code. But it's more of an integration space. So building applications where you basically start with a set of mockups and you know what individual screens need to look like. And then you have to go through a series of decisions to understand how that set of mockups will translate to an app that is implemented. So the decisions that you need to make are the actual data modeling. What are the entities that you work with? How you assign the properties and the responsibilities? How do you lay out the structure of data in the database and establish the relationships? Do you go directly to the database to do the data retrieval, or you go through an API service where you encapsulate some business logic? There are a lot of decisions there. And what happens is the people that are exposed to no code and they spend some time maybe on Udemy by going through a course, or whatever the training that a company provides, they get some knowledge, but that knowledge is in silos. Okay, everything else on the periphery about just the whole concept of building applications, there is void in there. Okay, now let's step back and think. Okay, we call it computer science. People go through, get graduate degrees or doctoral degrees in that space. And they don't call it science for nothing. I'm not saying that everyone needs to get a graduate degree in order to build applications, but what I'm saying is there is a lot more than the UI forms that you learn to build a certain logic or certain screen. And in order to become a developer that creates not just apps, but I would say kick-ass apps, you have to go step further to learn not just a little bit, but a lot more in order to get to that level. Like for instance, if you take, I would be really curious, just to go to a Node community and run like a survey where you ask questions. Okay, what is the difference between a stack and linked list? Okay, like where are you gonna get faster sorting? Linked list or a vector? The menu of like what is vector? But I'd be very curious how many people who consider themselves die-hard no-coders would be able to answer those questions. And those elements of knowledge are very important. Like the whole concept of assigning responsibilities in the no-code space, and I've seen a lot of training videos and training materials and playing with the product. Very few, actually, cannot remember a single company that would go to the extent of describing of how to apply that knowledge in order to execute certain tasks. As far as what we're doing, training is absolutely important. Okay, so right now, one of my focuses is just cranking out a bunch of training materials where people understand how to use the platform and how to build apps. And then right after that, one of the things that we're doing is we're going to be taking more or less representative applications like demo apps and dissecting them from the training perspective to really describe how we arrive at certain decisions in order to build those apps. So essentially it's going to, build with me type of thing, or build an open, where people will see how to use Backendless in order to build apps of, world-class type of level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I, when we first spoke, I can't remember how long ago it would have been now. I keep thinking it was last year, but actually it might have even been, more like 2020 or something. I've just kind of, last 2 years are lost in a blur, But when you and I first spoke, we talked about that. We talked about, no code is deceiving, because although you don't write code, you still have to kind of have that computational thinking or that algorithmic thinking, as I think you put it, and be able to kind of know how things fit together. And actually, since then we kind of launched No Code University, and that was our attempt at trying to figure out how do you teach almost computer science type, concepts, but in a way that's applicable to non-technical users. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about things like, what's a database relationship? How does that work? What's the difference between like a one-to-many and a many-to-many? We talked about what's a Boolean or a Boolean or however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Um, we talked about all these kind of things, and some things we get really into like the kind of nitty-gritty. And there's so much knowledge in there. We get some students who really, really like it. We got others who go, this is so much. I kind of thought this was kind of point and click. And a lot of people, I think, we try to teach in a really non-technical way, right? So people do eventually kind of get it. They just have to listen to a lot. But you're exactly right. We're teaching what feels like this big curriculum, and we've got more to add to it. But there's actually just when you're talking, there's so much out there. I mean, I think almost everything you mentioned is something we don't teach. Stacked list versus linked list, that kind of thing. We don't teach that, and it's something that's just so far beyond where the curriculum is now. And I think one of the, I guess, a big gap that we just saw is almost every education provider out there is creating how-to videos. Here's how to build a website like this, Airbnb like that. And those are really, really great. But if you don't have that prerequisite to, knowledge and the technology, then what tends to happen is people follow these tutorials and then they come back to us and they say, oh, I followed this tutorial, but it didn't work. Can you help me? And we get some of those requests every day, which is why we've ended up then launching this No-Code University. But little question for you in there then. Obviously, as we're saying, this is a pretty big learning curve. What kind of, maybe it's a percentage, maybe it's just an anecdote, but how many people who use Backendless would you actually consider non-technical? Is it kind of developers who are actually using your product, or is it true non-techies?
Um, I would, and when we say non-technical, I would imagine you mean have no technical background.
I
They,
mean, they can use, Microsoft Office, and I'm
yeah.
sure they'll learn using Backendless, but at the point that they sign up, they can use Microsoft Office. They can maybe build a website in Squarespace. That's about it.
It's hard to pinpoint specific percentage. We do not uh, take the measurement of their technical acumen when they come and when we put them through onboarding. But the data points that I would have is just by talking to people, having conversations, talking to customers or prospects, or seeing people's questions on the support forum. The percentage is rather small. For the reason that, and granted that we have a lot of conversations where people come in and they are doctors or dentists or lawyers. And the cool thing, and this is one thing that is so exciting, is you talk to those people and they come up with ideas for apps in their space. How they recognize the fact that technology can streamline processes and provide value for others in their positions, and which is fantastic. And this is one of the achievements of the no-code movement, is the fact that people come up with ideas, and rather than going and looking for technical talent to make it happen, they start tinkering with the technologies and thinking how they can do it themselves. That I love it. And then, of course, they run into some problems, and then, we help them through support, or they watch some videos, and they're making progress, and they become more technical as they go. The percentage of the people who are like business users and have never done any kind of programming is still rather small. For the reason that Backendless is positioned more as not so much as a tool to like build websites, although you can build websites. It really is a tool to build applications. And applications that call for scalability, call for kind of next level of complexity, and you can really succeed with that. But as time passes by, and we released our UI builder, it's going to be about a year and a half, so it hasn't had that much of a runway. Even with that, the number of users coming to us trying to do something that is completely outside of their comfort zone, and yet succeeding in building UIs, they just post like, hey guys, take a look at this, this is what I'm doing, something is not working. And then you start talking and they say, look, I've been a business analyst, just advising companies on their financials, like all my life. Like, this is the first page that I built. That's just amazing. But it is growing. The good thing, it is growing. It's very important to, and then we try to do it every time. It's very important to set the record straight, saying, look, it is achievable. You can build an app, but it requires you that you go through a learning curve, and you got to learn not only how the platform works, but you got to start thinking algorithmically. And these are the things that you can do to start thinking about it algorithmically. One of the biggest problems that I see with people who are not technical is they are not accustomed to the mindset of taking a problem and breaking it down into smaller problems. Because in software development, when you start, not so much software development, but in problem resolution or solving problems, where you basically like, this is the page that I need to build, or this is an app that I need to build. The whole process is cyclical and recursive, where you take the problem and you dissect it into the smaller one. And you take a smaller one and you dissect it to the smaller one. And I start identifying which parts can be reused. And then you model it all together. And that is not very straightforward process for people who were not trained to think that way.
Yeah, it kind of got me thinking there. You sort of mentioned sometimes like doctors and lawyers and dentists and these kind of people. These people who are trained professionals in fields that are usually considered very complex. I say usually considered, obviously. I think medicine's probably the most complex field out there. And it's interesting because when you think about it, I guess a doctor's day-to-day job is nothing to do with programming, but it is to take big problems and break them down. Okay, so we have these symptoms. Where could that come from? It's the liver. Okay, now if we think about the liver, it could be, this artery that goes through it. It could be, this tube or this pipe. And I guess it's that similar thing of, with programming, you're always trying to find the next step or a bug, let's say, and you're always just going down and cutting things out until eventually you get to the last thing. And it's interesting to think that actually that is a skill set a lot of people have, but not in a programming sense. So they maybe need to learn, our programmer terminology, but they already have the underlying mental model. And it's an interesting concept as well then, because I think if you look over the last 10 years, let's say, technology has been very, very disruptive in a lot of places, social media, finance, all these kind of massive industries. But I think one area where tech has not been as disruptive as I would have expected it to be would be healthcare. Clearly we've had innovations, and the fact you can get an Apple Watch on your wrist now that can detect your heartbeat, all that stuff's incredible. But it's not, I don't think it's had such a massive industry shift the way a lot of others have. And I think when a lot of kind of, traditionally techie people have tried to approach the industry, quite often they're met with this kind of ire of, well, tech solved all these other problems, so you think it can come in and solve this problem, and you're not a doctor, or that kind of thing. And so, it's interesting to think how much no code could start to allow people who have a deep industry expertise in a completely separate area from tech, how it could start letting them change their own industries, rather than tech just being this wave of people who come and consume all other industries. And that's one of the big, let's say, stages that no code still has to perform on is, have we seen it handling big professional, public visible apps? But I think you guys have an example of that, right? Because you guys have got, is it Bank of Etihad? You've got a bank mobile
Yes.
app that runs on Backendless. Tell us a
Right.
bit about that.
So it's a pretty cool story. The bank at some point made it. The bank was just a very traditional kind of brick and mortar bank, bunch of branches, and doing business kind of the old way. And they made a decision that they want to kind of change things around and apply technology as much as they can. And a strategic decision by the bank was to kind of shift into the mobile banking. And the benefits are rather obvious, because by shifting to mobile banking, you're essentially eliminating the need to run expensive infrastructure such as branches, ATMs, all the operational staff around it. it's enormous. It results in a quite significant operational cost. So with that direction being set by the management of the company, given the fact that the management had tremendous experience in the technological space, it was basically a new team that was brought on to kind of spearhead that effort. They understood that the whole concept of backend as a service could come into play, where by utilizing a backend as a service product, they can get a significant advantage in getting to market faster. So they went on to research available solutions. They found us, and at that time, it was long before we had UI Builder. Backendless started as a backend company, not because that was the vision. The vision was complete platform. We started with the backend. By the way, I'm going to digress a little bit. We started with the backend because in the whole space of UI and the backend is the harder problem to solve. And we wanted to solve it first, again, with an idea of scalability. That's what's in the core of scalability, is having a super scalable backend, the one that can scale infinitely. So we started with that first. So at that time, we were like backend as a service. So the customer found us, we had a conversation, we went through a proof of concept, and they just saw the benefits and started building the whole product. And it took some time to build all of the UIs, cover all the workflows as far as account management, transfers and deposits and so on. They launched it, and they were extremely successful in getting their customer base onto the app. And the benefits were just almost instantaneous. Customers, they didn't have to go to any branch. They could just do all the banking. They could see spending analysis, all kinds of different things. And Backendless is handling all the traffic, just processing transactions and creating the analysis. And we had to go through a couple of security audits because it is in the financials, and that was excruciating, but we passed all of them. So it was a very interesting experience, and we're proud to say that Backendless is in the core of that system, which is like running mobile banking. It's not a hello world application by any means.
No, 100%. I've worked for a bank before as well, and the mobile banking, system there was the biggest and ugliest as well, system running. Thousands of people working on that. So to hear it on a no-code tool was insane. And is that still running on Backendless today?
Yeah.
Wow. How long has that been?
How long has it been?
Yeah. How long has it been?
It's been a couple of years now.
Wow.
It went through a number of versions, and continually, the set of services is expanding as far as what Backendless does. Just like the front end is expanding. But yeah, it's still running in there. It's a very active app and the company, and they're really setting the standard they are in Middle East, setting the standard in that region for kind of forward thinking in an industry that has been confined by regulations and kind of lack of innovation. It's one of the shining stars.
Yeah, I bet. No, it sounds absolutely incredible. And it's interesting because I always kind of had this perception before that I always thought kind of Backendless was one of the kind of smaller companies. I thought you guys were mostly used by maybe kind of smaller teams and that sort of thing. But then I'm listening to this conversation. I'm hearing our own data center. I'm hearing infinite scalability. I'm hearing a bank. Tell me a wee bit more about Backendless as a company. I'm interested in knowing how big is a company, how long have you been around, and also who kind of are, more broadly, who are your customers, and who, what kind of, is it big companies or that kind of thing,
Sure. So we have been around for quite some time. This year, it's going to be our 10th anniversary in August since we actually started. The company is still relatively small. There are about 50 people in the company. Very agile, It's really because of the people. We have some of the best people in the industry, some of the most innovative people that I have ever worked with in my career. The type of customers that we work with, they are of all kind of walks of life and different sectors and different categories. And that is really primarily because the platform itself, the technological stack that we have, has three different versions. One is the cloud version that is open for everyone, low priced. You can build a lot of things. Some of the complex apps are still actually running not still, but they are running in the cloud version. There is an on-premise version where you can take the entire platform and put it on your own servers, Google Cloud, Azure, Amazon, doesn't matter. Anywhere where Kubernetes runs, you can run Backendless. And the third is a hybrid version where basically we create a dedicated instance. And because of that, it attracts different types of customers. Larger enterprise customers, they tend to gravitate to on-premise and to dedicated. And then small to medium-sized businesses, solo developers, development agencies, they operate within the cloud version. And with the cloud version, it's a freemium type of model, and we do it differently. We do a lot of things differently, like with our free plan. We do have a free plan, no charges, perpetual. But that plan is not given. You cannot just sign up and start using for free. You kind of have to earn it, okay? And the way you earn it is that we have an onboarding process called missions. And it's sort of a gamified experience where you go through a visual environment where you are given a task to do something in a platform. You go and do it, and it's like, you did it, good job, you get a badge, you move on in the progress. And at some point, you get to a milestone that says, good job, the free plan is unlocked. Now you can use it. If you don't want to mess with missions, you just pay one time $50 and you get the free plan. And I think it is kind of fair because, with my kids, I tell them that there's nothing that is free in life. You should not just expect that something will be free. And so I'm thinking, like, if I teach my kids this way, why should we just start giving away free plan? You got to earn it, right? Which I think is a fair deal. You get the complete platform at no cost that you can build your apps. So I think it is a fair deal.
Pretty fair,
but to answer your question, it's all over the map. Very large corporations, some national corporations here in the States that really put Backendless in the core of their business. Like, really if we were to go down for whatever reason, power outage, the business of those customers will stop. So we cannot go down. But at this point, we're fairly stable where the uptime has been consistent and the response time and the traffic is huge. So we're in that regard, we're doing quite well.
Super impressive, really, really impressive. It sounds like I have to roll you guys out more when people start asking me about, examples of no code being used in successful businesses. I get asked that question a lot, and I've kind of got a few kind of go-tos. I think I'm going to roll some Backendless stuff in there for sure. And a question for you, another kind of debate I've been hearing a little bit about recently, more in the kind of large kind of corporation side. So we talk a lot about these tools. There's stuff out there like Stacker or Internal.io where it seems to be very much like kind of business teams or product teams who are using it, or people like marketing, finance, operations. They kind of realize they usually start with something kind of simple like Airtable, then they realize they can get a much more featured product like Stacker or Internal or something, and then it kind of spreads from there. Is that where the growth is coming from for Backendless, or are you guys more on like the engineering side? Who's actually using you? Is it Sandra in accounting, or who is it?
As far as the actual individual users, like what are their roles?
Who's actually building? Is it engineers, or is it non-engineers?
There is not specific slice of the professional spectrum that would constitute the majority of our users. There are designers, that for a long time have been operating with like, Figma or Adobe XD, and they're creating the designs, and they come to Backendless because they see that, they can actually see the path of like creating those designs and putting it to life, where they come to life and you can actually turn it into a real app. Of course, there are quite a few software engineers and technical people who understand the process of building apps. It's interesting to see that quite a few of them who are familiar with a programming language, and they can definitely write JavaScript code or Android or iOS or whatever, or Flutter. And when it comes to building UIs or business logic with our codeless approach, given the choice like between Node and codeless, they do it with codeless. And I can see why. Like, for instance, I know multiple programming languages, but whenever I want to do something, I go for codeless, primarily for the reason of instant gratification. I can snap those logic pieces together, I can run, and I have it. Okay. Plus, it kind of forces me to be more disciplined. Like if it is a certain construct, whether it's a loop or a specific API call, and for each API call we have a separate block, it kind of forces me to be more disciplined. Like, okay, this is the type of argument that is accepted here. This is the type of value. So it takes that thinking outside of you, because it kind of just sets those constraints, which is awesome. So software developers is a fairly large audience, and then we see that they're gravitating towards no code. Non-technical people, like business users or people coming from different professions, they're also present. But everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome as long as we see that they are willing to go through the learning curve. There is a learning curve. Thinking that you can just start with Backendless and can instantly do something. If you knew nothing about software development, that's going to be hard. But if you're willing to contribute your time, you'll be able to get to create some impressive results.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's true for Backendless and true for every tool out there. I find myself saying that a lot. People are asking me questions, and I'll say, did you watch the fundamentals, or did you skip ahead to the kind of fun part where you get to design Airbnb? Because it is a learning curve. Fundamentally, you see it a lot with Webflow as well. It's a tool that's so loved now that people have begun to forget that it's got a learning curve. They call it easy, and it's only easy because it's easier than web development.
Sure.
But if you've never used Webflow, it's still hard to use. You still have to use a bit of HTML and CSS. So a couple of kind of final questions for you. Just want to get your view. So, I mean, first of all, what's kind of coming next for Backendless in 2022 and beyond?
Great question. So one of the top priorities that we have set for this year is to finally get that marketplace that we've talked about out and available. And we have expanded the whole concept of marketplace, where practically anything from the smaller elements to a larger scale, like apps, can become publishable. So if you develop the UI component, you can publish it into the marketplace for a fee or for free. So you share it with everyone, or just create a revenue stream for you. A UI theme, a page template, or complete application, or a piece of logic. So all those things, developers will be able to publish into the marketplace. And I envision, given the traction that we have in the development community, some could create sizable additional revenue stream just by doing that. So that's one. Second of all, we're working on something that may end up being bigger than what Backendless is today. Okay, and that will launch, a beta of it will launch this year, and it's in the space of creating more of a business level applications. Like, if you think about it, let's just take Uber, for instance. And Uber consists of multiple apps. There is a driver app, there is a passenger app, the one that everybody downloads. I'm sure there is an operations app where they can see in any given region, what's going on and what the orders are. There is going to be like a customer support app, like when you call and they can resolve issues. So the whole system, the platform of Uber consists of multiple apps. And those apps are deeply interconnected with each other, right? Like when they're from a passenger app, you put an order, the logic somewhere pings drivers, and like there is this coordination happening. So at this point where Backendless is today, you can create those individual apps. But in order to tie it all together, to create this kind of coordination, you have to write it, right? It's the separate piece of logic. And what we see is that people build those types of apps with Backendless. And they do spend time of creating those coordination orchestration layers. So the challenge that we took on is to make it trivially simple as it can get, to help people create that coordination layer, where you can basically build individual apps, UIs, or the backend API services or whatever, and you could have something coming in from Zapier or Integromat or whatever, but you would need to package it all together into one solution. And we want to make it happen in the way where you have to write 0 lines of code to put it all together. And that's what we're working on.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really common problem actually. I speak to a lot of people who, unsurprisingly, are building multi-app solutions. Something. I mean, we have our own demo of Uber actually, but it's 2 apps that speak to each other. But we don't quite go to the depth of, having more than 2. This idea of where you've got the customer service sort of app and all that kind of thing. So sounds like one to stay tuned for then. Very, very exciting. And last question for you then is, what's your kind of view on what's to come for the no-code space as a whole in the next kind of year, 2 years, etc.?
Great question. So there will definitely be some consolidation in the space, because the space is getting more and more saturated. Okay, what I think is going to happen is that some players will just fall out, just because it's going to be harder to continue standing out in the crowd and attract customers and generate revenue. And the more people join the space, and the more saturated it gets, the more commoditized it will become, right? So there are definitely some players who truly differentiate themselves. They will stay. And then some of the investments that we have seen, especially over the past 18 months, the valuations are huge. So a lot of money are being poured into those companies. And by doing so, they will see, okay, this and this, they're doing great. So companies will be kind of, swallowing each other, consolidating. But which is probably not good news for developers. Like whenever that consolidation happens, innovation generally slows down. Okay, but as long as there is this free thinking and innovation and so on, it will continue to advance. As far as our view onto the no-code space, and then the way it advances, I believe that by providing this ability for people to share what they have done as far as the UI components and no-code logic and or API services, that will really speed up the process of application development, because reuse is a very powerful thing. So if you can quickly, come up with a page and then reuse what others have done, that really will advance your productivity. And I think with no code space, the biggest thing will be just the productivity. One of the wishful thinking elements is I have been extremely impressed with what I have seen in the VR space, like Oculus VR. I don't know if you've tried it. Some of the games that I tried, they are mind-boggling. Like it is an incredible experience. Okay, if the whole space of creating those types of experiences for the VR world will ever expand to the space where a lot of people, just like in the code space, can create these type of experiences and publish them into this Oculus marketplace or whatever, that would be extremely exciting. But we're not anywhere close to that.
No, no, I know, and I get asked that a lot. What kind of tools can you use to build VR experiences? And the answer is I don't know. So please let me know. I heard of a couple, I think, like Scapic and whatnot, but there's definitely not too many killer applications for that just yet. But yeah, I guess maybe the metaverse will start to become a real thing pretty soon. But yeah, well, look, thank you very much for coming on. That has been an incredibly exciting conversation. I feel like I personally have learned a lot about what Backendless can do, and certainly about the sheer scale of it. It's really really impressive. I've got no doubt, that when it is time to build for the metaverse, I'm sure Backendless will have an add-on for that as well. Really really impressive suite you've got there. So yeah, I think if you're listening in the audience, if you want to find out a bit more about Backendless, I think I'm right in saying, Mark, the URL is backendless.com. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah, cool. So go to backendless.com, check it out. There's as Mark says, a really, really cool kind of mission system on there that will help you get kind of introduced to the tool. And I think quite a good bit of education content on there as well. And I know we've got a little bit on No Code University. But Mark, if anyone listening has questions or wants to get started, how can they get in touch with you?
It's actually very easy. So if you go to support.backendless.com, that's our general support forum. To get a hold of me personally, you can follow me on Twitter. It is @codelesscoder, or just search me on LinkedIn. It is Mark Piller, and I'm available there as well.
Perfect. There you go. Codeless Coder. I like it. I wish I'd got that handle. Mark, thank you very much for coming on. Have a great day, and we'll speak again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Al.